Dr. Maya Bennett had spent years saving lives without asking who they were. One cold night in a busy Chicago hospital, two patients arrived at once: a stableman with an injured leg and an elderly woman barely breathing. Maya chose the one closer to death. That decision sparked outrage, a lawsuit, and a courtroom battle where compassion was questioned. They said she broke the rules. She chose to save a life. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The wind cut sharply through downtown Chicago, sweeping between glass buildings and rattling against the hospital windows. It was just past 11:40 p.m., and the city felt like it was holding its breath under a sky heavy with snow clouds. Inside St. Mary's Medical Center, the rhythm was anything but still. Stretchers rolled, monitors beeped, voices overlapped. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Dr. Maya Bennett finally allowed herself to exhale. Maya Bennett was 40 years old, of average height with a lean, resilient build, shaped by years of long shifts and little rest. Her deep brown skin carried faint lines at the corners of her eyes, not from age alone, but from witnessing too many nights where life and death stood inches apart. Her hair was pulled back tightly into a low bun, practical and neat. Her dark eyes were sharp, observant, and calm under pressure, but tonight there was a quiet exhaustion behind them. She wore a slightly wrinkled navy scrub top beneath a white coat that had seen more years than most interns in the building. A stethoscope rested around her neck like a constant reminder. She was never truly off duty. Maya had spent over a decade in emergency medicine. But what defined her wasn't just her experience. It was a moment from years ago she never spoke about. Her younger brother had died in a waiting room. He hadn't looked critical, not urgent enough, not important enough, and by the time someone realized he was, it was too late. Since then, Maya had never trusted appearances. She trusted only one thing: who needed help first. Tonight had been no different. She had just finished stabilizing a trauma patient from a car accident. Her hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic despite multiple washes. Her shoulders ached. Her legs felt heavier with each step toward the staff exit. "Long night?" a voice called behind her. Maya turned slightly. It was Lena Carter, a registered nurse in her early 30s. Lena was medium height with a soft, composed presence that patients seemed to trust immediately. Her warm brown skin and gentle eyes gave her a naturally calming aura, but there was also a quiet tension in her posture tonight. Her curly hair was tied loosely at the back, a few strands escaping after hours of work. Lena had joined the hospital 5 years ago. Unlike many, she hadn't grown numb, and that made this place harder for her. "Every night is a long night here," Maya replied softly, offering a tired but genuine smile. Lena stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They've been talking again." Maya didn't need to ask who. Administration. "They want stricter intake protocols," Lena continued. "Insurance verification before priority classification, especially for non-critical cases." Maya let out a slow breath. "Define non-critical," she said quietly. Lena didn't answer immediately, because they both knew. That definition wasn't always about medicine anymore. It was about paperwork, about liability, about money. Maya adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "I'm off shift," she said. "That's someone else's problem tonight." But even as she said it, her eyes drifted back toward the ER doors. She never really left. Before Lena could respond, the sound hit. Sharp, urgent, sirens, then another. The automatic doors burst open. Two stretchers rushed in almost at the same time. Everything shifted instantly. Maya's body reacted before her mind caught up. She turned, back into the storm. The first stretcher carried Robert Hayes, a 52-year-old white man with a broad, heavy build. His face was pale but alert, jaw clenched in irritation rather than pain. His sandy gray hair was slightly disheveled, and his expensive jacket had been cut open at the leg. His right ankle was swollen, angled awkwardly, but he was conscious. very conscious. "Watch it," he snapped at the paramedic. "That hurts." Behind him walked his son, Daniel Hayes, 27, tall and lean with a restless energy that filled the room before he even spoke. His arms were covered in dark tattoos that crawled up to his neck. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled. Leather jacket, worn boots. His sharp blue eyes moved quickly, scanning everything with suspicion and impatience. Daniel wasn't used to waiting, and he wasn't used to being ignored. "My dad needs a doctor now," he said loudly, stepping forward. "Right now." The second stretcher came in just seconds later, and the atmosphere changed. On it lay Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, 78 years old. Her body was frail, almost weightless beneath the thin hospital blanket. Her deep brown skin looked ashen under the fluorescent lights. Her chest rose unevenly, each breath shallow and strained, assisted by an oxygen mask that fogged with urgency. Her eyes were half open, unfocused. Her body was failing. Beside her was Alicia Brooks, 25. She was of medium height, slender but steady, her posture tense with contained fear. Her dark curly hair was tied back, her face bare of makeup, revealing eyes that had clearly seen struggle but not defeat. Her hands trembled slightly as she held onto the edge of the stretcher. "Please," Alicia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "She can't breathe." Maya stepped forward. Everything else faded. No noise, no pressure, no rules, just assessment. Her eyes moved quickly. Robert, conscious, stable vitals, localized injury. Eleanor, unstable airway, respiratory distress, seconds matter. The decision took less than a second. "Room 3, now," Maya said firmly, pointing to Eleanor. "Respiratory team, move." Then, without raising her voice, she added, "Take him to waiting. He's stable." Daniel froze. For half a second, he didn't process it. Then it hit. "What?" he snapped, stepping forward. No, you're not serious." Maya didn't look at him. Her focus was already on Eleanor. "Ma'am, stay with me," she said, adjusting the oxygen mask. "You're going to be okay." Daniel's voice rose. "Hey, my dad got here first. He needs treatment now." Lena stepped in slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, your father is stable. He will be seen shortly." "Shortly?" Daniel scoffed. "You think I'm going to sit here and wait while—" He stopped himself, but the implication was already hanging in the air. Maya heard it. She just didn't respond. Because she had heard worse, because she had learned something a long time ago. When someone is dying, you don't argue, you act. Eleanor's breathing dropped again. Maya's tone sharpened. "Move!" The team rushed. The stretcher disappeared through the emergency doors. Alicia followed, her hand still gripping the rail as if letting go would mean losing everything. Daniel stood there, stunned. Anger building. "How is this even allowed?" he muttered, shaking his head. Robert groaned from the stretcher. "Daniel, it's just my leg." But Daniel wasn't listening. His pride had already taken over. "This isn't over," he said under his breath. Lena exhaled slowly. She turned to Maya, who was already halfway into the ER room. "Dr. Bennett," Lena called softly. Maya paused just for a second. Lena hesitated, then said what had been weighing on her. "They're watching cases like this now, administration." Maya didn't turn. "I know," she said. Then she stepped inside, and the doors closed behind her. Outside, the wind howled against the glass. Inside, a life hung by a thread, and somewhere in the distance, consequences were already beginning to form. The emergency room doors slammed shut behind Dr. Maya Bennett, sealing off the noise from the hallway, but not the tension that had followed her in. Inside room 3, everything sharpened. The fluorescent lights felt harsher, the air colder. Every second louder. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks lay on the bed, her frail chest rising unevenly beneath the thin blanket. The oxygen mask fogged rapidly, her breaths shallow, irregular, fading. Maya stepped in fast, her exhaustion gone, replaced by something colder and more precise. "Vitals," she said. A young nurse moved forward. This was Ethan Morales, 26, newly assigned to the night shift. He was slightly shorter than average, with a slim build and dark hair that he pushed back nervously whenever under pressure. His brown eyes were alert but inexperienced, still learning how to hold steady when things began to slip out of control. Pulse dropping, 80, 76, Ethan reported, voice tightening. Respiration unstable, another voice added. That voice belonged to Dr. Aaron Patel, a respiratory specialist in his early 40s. He had a calm, analytical demeanor, medium height with a lean frame, always composed even in chaos. Years of ICU work had trained him to detach emotionally when needed, but not completely. Not yet. Maya didn't waste a second. She's not getting enough oxygen. Maya leaned closer to Eleanor, her voice steady, firm. Stay with me. You're not going anywhere tonight. For a brief second, Eleanor's eyes flickered. Then her chest stuttered. The monitor let out a sharp, uneven tone. Pulse dropping, 60, 55. Ethan's voice broke slightly. Maya's eyes hardened. Bag her, now. Dr. Patel moved instantly, securing the airway support while Maya checked responsiveness. Time compressed, hands moved faster. Orders came sharper. Push oxygen. Check airway resistance. Stay with me, Eleanor. Outside the room, the storm was different. Daniel Hayes was pacing like a caged animal. His boots hit the floor hard with every step. His jaw clenched tighter with each passing second. This is ridiculous, he muttered. This is actually ridiculous. Robert Hayes sat on a temporary gurney nearby, his injured leg elevated awkwardly. His face was still tense, but not from pain, more from discomfort, from not being in control. Daniel, sit down, Robert said, his voice strained but calmer. No, I'm not sitting down, Daniel snapped. Did you see that? She just ignored you, like you don't matter. Robert exhaled slowly. I'm not dying, he said, but Daniel didn't hear that part. What he saw wasn't urgency. It was injustice. A hospital security officer approached. This was Marcus Hill, mid-30s, tall with a solid muscular build. His presence alone was enough to quiet most situations. His shaved head and steady eyes gave him an air of control, but those who worked with him knew. Marcus didn't escalate. He contained. Sir, Marcus said calmly, I'm going to need you to lower your voice. Daniel turned sharply. Or what? He challenged. Or you'll need to step outside, Marcus replied evenly. Daniel laughed bitterly. Yeah, because I'm asking why my father isn't being treated? You're disrupting patient care. No, they are, Daniel shot back, pointing toward the closed ER doors. They chose her over him. Marcus didn't respond to that, because that wasn't how triage worked. And deep down, he knew that argument wasn't really about medicine anymore. It was about something else. Sir, Marcus said again, firmer this time, step outside. Daniel hesitated. Then, with a sharp exhale, he shoved his hands into his jacket and stormed toward the exit. This isn't over, he muttered again. But as he stepped outside, his anger didn't leave. It evolved. Inside the ER, the situation worsened. The monitor beeped erratically. Pulse, 40. Ethan's voice was barely steady now. Alicia took a step forward, unable to stay back anymore. Maya raised a hand slightly without looking. Stay there. Not harsh, not cold, but absolute. Eleanor's chest rose once, then faltered. Dr. Patel glanced at Maya. We're losing her. Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned closer, placing her hand firmly against Eleanor's shoulder. Her voice dropped. Low, grounded. Not tonight. Then louder. Again. Push. The room moved in unison. Seconds stretched, then a change, subtle but real. Pulse stabilizing, 50, 60. Ethan blinked. 72. Dr. Patel exhaled quietly. Maya didn't step back yet, not until she saw it fully. Eleanor's breathing steadied, still fragile but no longer collapsing. The monitor smoothed. The room slowed, and for the first time since she entered, Maya allowed herself to breathe. "She's back!" Ethan said, almost in disbelief. Alicia covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking as silent tears finally came. Maya turned slightly toward her. "She's not out of danger yet," she said gently, "but she's here." Alicia nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the cold air hit Daniel's face hard, but it didn't calm him. If anything, it sharpened him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands moved quickly. He opened the camera, turned it toward the hospital entrance. "This is what they do," he began recording, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You come in needing help, and they decide who matters." His words were messy, emotional, but powerful, and most importantly, they were being recorded. Inside, Lena Carter stood near the nurse's station, watching everything unfold. Her eyes moved between the ER doors, and Daniel outside, filming. Her chest tightened. She had seen this before. Moments taken out of context, stories twisted. But tonight felt different. Because she had been there. She had seen the numbers, the breathing, the moment Eleanor almost disappeared. Lena reached slowly into her pocket, pulled out her own phone, hesitated, then pressed record. Not of Daniel, but of the timeline, the clock, the intake board, the vitals, everything. Quietly, carefully, not to expose, but to remember. An hour later, the storm inside the hospital had settled. Eleanor Brooks was stable, still fragile, but alive. Maya stepped out of the ER room, removing her gloves slowly. Her hands trembled slightly now that it was over. Lena approached her. "She made it," Lena said softly. Maya nodded. "Barely." Lena hesitated, then added, "Administration won't see it that way." Maya looked at her. "I didn't do it for them." Across the room, another doctor approached Robert Hayes. This was Dr. Stephen Collins, mid-50s, slightly overweight with thinning gray hair and tired eyes behind rectangular glasses. He was competent, experienced, but cautious. The kind of doctor who followed protocol carefully, rarely stepping outside it. "Mr. Hayes," Dr. Collins said, "let's take a look at that leg." Within minutes, the assessment was complete. "A sprain," he confirmed. "Painful, but not serious." Robert nodded slowly, relief mixed with something else, something quieter. Across the room, Daniel returned. His expression hadn't softened. If anything, it had hardened into something more deliberate. He glanced at his father, then at Maya, then at his phone. And in that moment, the conflict wasn't over. It had just begun. By the time the sun rose over Chicago, the storm had already begun. Not the kind that rattled windows or buried streets in snow. This one moved through screens, through voices, through millions of eyes scrolling past a single moment, cut, framed, and posted without context. Daniel Hayes barely slept. He sat in his car just outside the hospital parking lot, the engine off, the cold slowly seeping through the glass. His phone glowed in his hands, the video already uploaded sometime around 2:17 a.m. He had watched it twice before posting, not to question himself, but to sharpen the message. In the clip, his voice was louder than it had been in reality, anger amplified by adrenaline. "They're ignoring a paying patient," he said into the camera. "They chose someone else over my father. This is what happens when people decide who matters." He didn't mention vital signs. He didn't mention the word critical. He didn't need to. By morning, the video had spread beyond his expectations. A few hundred views became a few thousand, then tens of thousands. By 9:30 a.m., it had crossed 100,000 views, and the comments came fast. Some stood with him. "This is discrimination. If you're paying, you should come first." Others pushed back. "Emergency rooms don't work like that. She saved a life. That's her job." The arguments grew louder with every hour, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Dr. Maya Bennett was just waking up. Maya sat on the edge of her bed, her apartment quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Her place was modest, small, clean, and practical. No unnecessary decoration. Just a few framed photos on the shelf, one of them showing her and her younger brother years ago, both smiling under a summer sun that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. She reached for her phone. Missed calls, messages, more notifications than she had seen in months. Her brow furrowed slightly. Then she opened one. A message from Lena. "Have you seen what's happening?" Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened the link attached. The video loaded. She watched it once, then closed it. Her face didn't change, but something inside her tightened. Not fear, not regret, something else, recognition. She had seen this before, not the same story, but the same pattern. Back at St. Mary's Medical Center, the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer just a hospital. It was a place under scrutiny. Staff whispered in corners. Phones were checked more often than charts, and at the center of it, Maya's name. Lena Carter stood near the nurse's station, her posture straighter than usual, her expression more guarded. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the events from the night before over and over again. She knew what she had seen, but she also knew how quickly truth could be reshaped. A hospital administrator approached. This was Karen Whitfield, mid-40s, tall and sharply dressed, with a posture that carried authority even before she spoke. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, her expression controlled, professional, but distant. Karen had spent most of her career in healthcare management, not patient care. Numbers, policies, public image, those were her priorities. "Nurse Carter," Karen said, her voice calm but firm. "We'll need statements from everyone involved last night." Lena nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Karen glanced briefly toward the ER doors. "This situation is gaining attention," she added. "We need clarity." Clarity. Lena almost asked, clarity for who? But she didn't, because she understood what Karen really meant. Control. Across the city, inside a small newsroom filled with low conversations and glowing monitors, another set of eyes locked onto the same video. Mark Reynolds leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting on the desk. Mark was 38, with a slightly rugged appearance. Short brown hair, light stubble, and tired eyes that had spent years chasing stories most people preferred to ignore. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud, but he noticed things. Things others missed. He clicked replay, watched Daniel's expression, paused, then scrolled through the comments, then leaned back. "This isn't about what happened," he muttered to himself. "This is about what people think happened." A younger producer walked over. This was Emily Park, late 20s, energetic, quick-thinking, always moving faster than the room around her. Her black hair was cut just above her shoulders, and her eyes carried the kind of curiosity that made her good at her job. "You seeing this?" she asked. Mark nodded. "Yeah." "Feels big," Emily said. Mark didn't answer immediately. He had learned something over the years. Big stories weren't always the loudest. They were the ones that didn't fit cleanly into a headline. "Let's not assume yet," he said. "Find out who the doctor is." Emily nodded and moved quickly, and just like that, the story had a new direction. Back in the hospital, Alicia Brooks sat beside her grandmother's bed. The room was quieter now. Machines hummed steadily. Eleanor Brooks rested, her breathing still assisted but stable, her face no longer strained with the same desperation from the night before. Alicia held her hand gently. Her movements were careful, almost protective. She had not left since they arrived. Not even when the nurses suggested rest, because she knew something about losing people, and she wasn't ready to risk it again. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A message from a friend. "Isn't this your grandma?" A link, a video. Alicia's expression changed slowly as she watched. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something deeper. Hurt. "They don't know," she whispered. Her grip tightened slightly around Eleanor's hand. They weren't there. Eleanor stirred faintly. Not awake, but present. Alicia leaned closer. "You're okay," she said softly. "You're still here." But her eyes had already shifted, from fear to something else. Resolve. Later that afternoon, in a quiet hallway near the administrative offices, Maya stood alone. She had returned to the hospital after receiving multiple calls, not to defend herself. Not yet. But because she knew. This wasn't going to stay inside those walls. Karen Whitfield approached her. "Dr. Bennett," she said. Maya turned. Karen held a thin folder in her hand. "We're opening an internal review," she said, direct and composed. "Standard procedure." Maya nodded once. "I understand." Karen studied her briefly. "You made a judgment call," she continued. "We need to determine whether it aligned with hospital protocol." Maya didn't respond immediately, then simply said, "I made a medical decision." Karen's expression didn't change, but there was a pause, just long enough to reveal the gap between them. Protocol versus judgment. "We'll be in touch," Karen said, turning away. And just like that, it became official. That evening, as the city lights flickered on and the temperature dropped again, the video crossed 500,000 views. The comments didn't slow. They multiplied. Arguments turned into debates. Debates turned into sides. And somewhere in the middle, the truth remained quiet. Waiting. The cold in Chicago felt sharper that morning, as if the city itself had grown less forgiving overnight. News vans lined the street outside St. Mary's Medical Center, their satellite dishes pointed toward the gray sky like silent witnesses. What had started as a single video was now something else entirely. A narrative forming, shifting, hardening. Inside the hospital, the air was heavier. Doctor. Maya Bennett walked through the corridor with her usual steady pace, but the atmosphere around her had changed. Conversations softened when she passed. Eyes lingered longer than they should. Some held support, others uncertainty. Maya didn't react. She had learned long ago that noise, whether praise or criticism, could distract from what mattered. But today, the noise was unavoidable. "Dr. Bennett," a voice called. She turned. A man in a dark gray suit approached, holding a leather folder tightly against his chest. This was Thomas Green, a hospital legal advisor in his early 50s. He was tall and thin, with a narrow face and neatly combed silver hair. His demeanor was polite, but distant, the kind of man who measured every word before speaking. Years of handling hospital disputes had made him cautious, less about people, more about consequences. "We need to speak," he said. Maya nodded once. "Now?" He hesitated briefly. "It would be best." They stepped into a small conference room. The door closed, and with it the line between medicine and something else entirely. Thomas placed the folder on the table and opened it carefully. Inside were printed documents. Official, structured, final. "A formal complaint has been filed," he said, his voice even, "by Daniel Hayes on behalf of his father." Maya's expression didn't change, but her eyes lowered briefly to the page. The words were clear. Negligence, discrimination, violation of protocol. Thomas continued. "They are claiming that you denied timely treatment to a stable, insured patient in favor of another individual without verified coverage." Maya looked up. "I treated the patient who was dying," she said. Thomas nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the statement, but not fully agreeing with it. "Yes," he said, "but this case is no longer just about what happened medically. It's about how it will be interpreted." Maya leaned back slightly. "I'm not interested in interpretation." Thomas exhaled slowly. "That may not be an option anymore." Across the table sat Karen Whitfield, silent until now. She had entered the room moments earlier, her presence as controlled as ever. Her posture remained perfect, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "We are facing significant public pressure," Karen said. "The hospital's reputation is at stake." Maya glanced at her. "I see." Karen continued, her tone steady but firm. There is a path forward that could minimize damage for everyone involved. Maya already knew what was coming. An internal acknowledgement, Karen said, a statement expressing regret for procedural oversight. No admission of wrongdoing, but enough to resolve the situation quietly. Maya's gaze sharpened slightly. You want me to apologize? Karen didn't answer directly. We want to protect the institution, she said instead. There it was. Not the patient, not the truth. The institution. Maya stood slowly. I didn't make a procedural decision, she said. I made a medical one. Karen's expression remained unchanged. And yet the procedure exists for a reason. Maya held her gaze. So does judgment. A brief silence settled between them. Then Maya added, her voice calm but unwavering. I save people, not paperwork. Thomas shifted slightly in his seat. Karen's fingers tightened just enough to notice. You need to understand, Karen said, trace of pressure finally entering her tone. This could escalate. Maya nodded. I know. And you're refusing to cooperate. Maya paused, then answered clearly, I'm refusing to lie. Outside the room, Lena Carter stood near the hallway corner, her hands clasped tightly together. She hadn't meant to overhear, but the door hadn't been fully closed and the tension inside had spilled out in fragments. Apologize, procedure, institution. Each word landed heavier than the last. Lena leaned back against the wall, her thoughts racing. She had seen everything, every second of that night. She knew Maya hadn't hesitated. She knew why. But knowing something and proving it were not the same. Her phone felt heavier in her pocket. The recordings she had taken, the timestamps, the vitals, the order of events, they were still there. Untouched, unseen, safe. For now. Lena closed her eyes, briefly. She had always believed in doing the right thing, but she had also learned something else working in this hospital. Doing the right thing didn't always protect you. Sometimes it exposed you. Across the city, inside the newsroom, Mark Reynolds sat surrounded by files, notes, and multiple screens playing clips from different angles of the same story. He had found something, not in the video, but beyond it. Emily, he called. She walked over quickly, holding a tablet. What did you get? She asked. Mark turned one of the screens toward her. This doctor, Maya Bennett, he said, she's not new to this kind of decision. He clicked open a file, a previous case, then another, then another. 3 years ago, he continued, she stayed past her shift to operate on an uninsured patient when no one else would. Another click. 5 years ago, she pushed for emergency surgery against protocol, saved a kid. Emily leaned closer. Why isn't any of this out there? She asked. Mark gave a small, knowing look. Because stories like that don't go viral, he said. He leaned back in his chair. But this one might. Emily crossed her arms slightly. So what are you thinking? Mark didn't answer immediately. He looked at the video again, then at the files, then back at the screen. I think, he said slowly, we're looking at the wrong version of this story. Back at the hospital, the meeting had ended. Maya stepped out into the hallway, her expression calm, but her steps slightly slower than before, not uncertain, just aware. The weight of what was coming had settled. Lena approached her carefully. Are you okay? She asked. Maya looked at her. A small pause, then, I will be. Lena nodded, but she didn't feel reassured, because she knew this wasn't just about one decision anymore. It was about everything that followed. Down the hall, through the glass windows, the city moved as usual. Cars passed, people walked, life continued. But inside these walls, a line had been drawn, and no one was stepping back from it. The courthouse stood in the heart of downtown Chicago, its stone steps cold and unforgiving under the pale morning light. A thin layer of frost clung to the railings, and the air carried that same biting chill that had marked the night everything began. But today, the cold outside felt almost irrelevant compared to what was waiting inside. People had gathered early. Reporters, cameras, onlookers drawn by headlines and half-understood stories. Inside courtroom 3B, the atmosphere was tense, controlled, and heavy with expectation. Dr. Maya Bennett sat at the defense table, her posture straight, her hands resting calmly in front of her. She wore a simple dark suit, nothing flashy, nothing distracting. Her hair was tied back neatly as always, her expression composed, but not distant. Her eyes moved quietly across the room, taking everything in. This was not her world, but she wasn't afraid of it. Across from her sat Daniel Hayes. He looked different from the hospital. Cleaner, sharper. His jacket was fitted, his hair combed back, but the restless energy remained. His jaw was tight, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. The anger was still there. It had just learned to sit still. Beside him sat his lawyer, Victor Langford, a man in his late 40s with a polished, commanding presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a deep voice that carried even when he spoke softly. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his silver cufflinks catching the light with small, deliberate flashes. Victor had built his reputation on precision. He didn't argue loudly, he dismantled quietly, and today he intended to do exactly that. Behind them, Robert Hayes sat in silence. His leg had healed enough to allow him to walk, but he still moved carefully, as if the injury had left more than just physical traces. His expression was more reserved now, less certain than before. On Maya's side sat Thomas Green, the hospital's legal representative, his usual calm demeanor slightly tighter around the edges. In the gallery, Lena Carter sat 2 rows back. Her hands rested in her lap, but they weren't still. Her fingers pressed against each other lightly, a quiet reflection of the decision she had made. She had not slept much, because today she was no longer just watching. She was part of it. The courtroom doors closed. A hush fell. Then, "All rise." Judge William Carter entered. He was in his early 60s, tall with a solid build, his presence filling the room before he even spoke. His gray hair was neatly combed, his face lined not just with age, but with years of authority. His eyes were sharp, observant, but there was something else there, too. A firmness that bordered on rigidity. He had spent decades believing in order, in structure, in rules, and in his courtroom. Those rules mattered. "Be seated." The room complied. Judge Carter adjusted his glasses slightly, scanning the documents in front of him before looking up. "This court will now hear the case of Hayes versus Bennett." His gaze shifted toward Maya, measured, unblinking. "Dr. Bennett," he said, "you are accused of violating established hospital protocol in a manner that resulted in delayed treatment for a patient under your care." Maya didn't move. "Do you understand the nature of this accusation?" "I do," she said. Her voice was steady, clear. Victor Langford stood. "Your Honor," he began, his tone controlled but firm, "this case is not merely about a decision. It is about a pattern of disregard for procedure. My client, Mr. Hayes, was denied timely care despite being stable, insured, and present first." He paused, letting the words settle. This is not a matter of emergency judgment. This is a matter of selective prioritization. The phrase hung in the air. Selective prioritization carefully chosen. Maya listened, but she didn't react. Victor continued, turning slightly toward the judge. "We are not here to question compassion. We are here to question consistency." Judge Carter nodded slowly, then turned to Maya. "Dr. Bennett," he said, his voice firm, "I would like you to review the hospital's intake protocol." He gestured toward a printed document placed in front of her. Thomas Green shifted slightly beside her. Maya reached for the paper. The pages felt heavier than they should, not because of the words, but because of what they represented. She scanned it briefly. Lines, guidelines, procedures designed to create order in chaos. Judge Carter leaned forward slightly. "Please read the relevant section aloud." Maya lifted her eyes. For a moment, the room felt completely still. Then she spoke. "The protocol states that patients are to be assessed and prioritized based on clinical urgency," she read. Victor raised an eyebrow slightly. Judge Carter watched her closely. "And yet," the judge said, "your decision has been interpreted as inconsistent with that very principle." There it was. Not a question. A statement. Maya placed the document back on the table. Her hands remained steady. "I made a decision based on clinical urgency," she said. Victor stepped forward slightly. "Then why," he asked, "was my client's father not treated first?" Maya looked at him, then answered, "Because he wasn't dying." A ripple moved through the room. Subtle, but undeniable. Judge Carter's expression hardened slightly. "Dr. Bennett," he said, "this court is not interested in emotional interpretations." Maya met his gaze, neither defiant nor submissive, just certain. "This isn't emotional," she said, a pause, then, "It's medical." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Judge Carter picked up the document again. "Protocol exists for a reason," he said. Maya nodded once. "I agree." "Then do you acknowledge," he continued, "that your actions may have deviated from it?" Maya paused, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she understood the weight of it. Then she said, "I may have broken protocol." The room held its breath. "But I did not break my responsibility." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. "I saw a patient who was about to stop breathing. I made the only decision that would keep her alive." She leaned forward slightly. "I can accept consequences for that." Another pause, then the line that settled over the room like a quiet truth. "But I will not apologize for it." Silence. Complete. Even Victor didn't interrupt. Judge Carter's eyes remained fixed on her. For a moment, something unreadable passed through his expression. Then it was gone. In the back of the courtroom, a small camera lens adjusted focus. The footage streamed live. Across screens, across phones, across the city. Mark Reynolds stood near the side wall, watching both the courtroom and the numbers rising on his device. Viewership just doubled. Emily whispered beside him. Mark nodded slightly, because he had expected that, not because of drama, but because of something else. Truth, when spoken clearly, had a way of cutting through noise. Lena Carter sat still, but inside everything had shifted. She had heard Maya's words. She had seen the way the room reacted, and she knew. This was the moment, the point where silence would no longer protect anything. Her hand moved slowly toward her bag. Inside it, her phone, her recordings, her proof. She closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. Steady now, certain, because she had made her decision. The judge tapped his pen lightly against the desk. "This court will proceed with witness examination in the next session," he said. His voice returned to its usual measured tone. Controlled, structured. But something had changed. Not in the rules, but in the room. The trial had begun, and it was no longer just about what happened that night. It was about what people believed mattered most. The courtroom felt different that morning. Not quieter, not calmer, but heavier, like something unspoken had settled into the walls overnight, waiting to be acknowledged. Outside, the wind had softened, but inside, tension held steady, stretching across every seat, every glance, every breath. Dr. Maya Bennett sat where she had the day before, her posture unchanged, her composure intact. But the silence around her carried a different weight now, not just scrutiny, but anticipation. Across the aisle, Daniel Hayes leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his jaw set tighter than before. The confidence he had walked in with was still there, but thinner now, edged with something less certain. His eyes flickered occasionally toward the gallery, where more people had gathered than the day before, because the story had grown, and so had the audience. Judge William Carter entered, his presence once again commanding the room. But this time, his gaze lingered longer across the courtroom, as if he too could feel the shift even if he didn't acknowledge it. "Proceed," he said. Victor Langford stood, composed as always. "The plaintiff calls its next witness." But before he could continue, Thomas Green rose. "The defense would like to call a witness first, Your Honor." A brief pause. Judge Carter nodded once. "Proceed." Thomas turned slightly. "Nurse Lena Carter." A ripple moved through the room. Lena stood. For a moment she didn't move forward, not because she was unsure, but because she understood exactly what stepping into that space meant. She took a breath, then walked. Lena Carter stood at the witness stand, her posture upright but her hands resting lightly against the edge for balance. Up close, the quiet strength in her was more visible. Her eyes, warm and steady, carried both compassion and something else now. Resolve. "State your name and position," Thomas said. "Lena Carter," she replied. "Registered nurse, St. Mary's Medical Center." Thomas nodded. "Were you present during the events in question?" "Yes." "Can you describe what you observed?" Lena paused briefly, not searching for words, but choosing them carefully. "There were 2 patients brought in at nearly the same time," she began. "One with a leg injury, stable, conscious. The other, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, was in severe respiratory distress." Victor shifted slightly but did not interrupt. Thomas continued. "In your professional opinion, which patient required immediate intervention?" Lena's voice didn't waver. "Mrs. Brooks." "Why?" "Because she was losing the ability to breathe," Lena said. "Her oxygen levels were dropping rapidly. Without immediate intervention, she could have gone into cardiac arrest." The words landed cleanly. Not emotional, not defensive. Just factual. Victor stepped forward. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly, "are you suggesting that hospital protocol allows for subjective judgment over established procedure?" Lena turned toward him. "No," she said. "I'm saying protocol requires us to assess urgency." Victor tilted his head slightly. "And you're certain this was the case?" Lena reached into her bag. The movement was small, but it changed everything. "I documented the timeline," she said. She placed her phone on the stand. "The vitals, the intake times, the sequence of events." A murmur spread across the room. Victor's expression shifted, just slightly. Thomas stepped closer. "Your Honor, we would like to submit this as evidence." Judge Carter leaned forward. "Proceed." Lena continued, her voice steady. "There was no delay in care for Mr. Hayes that endangered his life," she said, "but there would have been for Mrs. Brooks." Silence. Then Victor stepped back, for the first time since the trial began. He didn't have an immediate response. In the gallery, Alicia Brooks sat still, her hands resting tightly together in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on Lena, then on Maya, then back again. Something inside her had shifted long before this moment, but now it was clear. She stood. "Your Honor," she said, her voice soft but firm. All eyes turned. Judge Carter hesitated briefly, then nodded. "State your name." "Alicia Brooks," she said. "I'm Mrs. Brooks' granddaughter." She stepped forward slightly. Her posture straightened, not from confidence, but from necessity. "If she hadn't been treated right away," Alicia continued, her voice catching for just a second before steadying, "she wouldn't be here." The room quieted completely. "She wasn't just sick," Alicia said. "She was dying." Her eyes moved briefly toward Daniel, then back to the judge. "That doctor didn't choose who mattered more," she said. "She chose who had less time." No one interrupted, because there was nothing to interrupt. The truth had a way of standing on its own. Across the courtroom, Daniel shifted in his seat. For the first time, his gaze dropped. Not completely, but enough. Beside him, Robert Hayes sat with his hands clasped tightly together. His shoulders, once rigid with quiet support for his son, had begun to lower. He glanced toward Maya, then toward Alicia, then down at the floor. Something unfamiliar moved through him. Not anger, not defense. Recognition. The memory of that night came back differently now. Not through his son's voice, not through the video, but through what he himself had felt. He hadn't been afraid, not like that woman had been, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. Near the side wall, Mark Reynolds watched everything unfold. His phone screen displayed rising numbers, live viewers climbing faster than before. Beside him, Emily whispered, "This is turning." Mark didn't look at the screen. He was watching the people, the reactions, the shift. He had covered enough stories to recognize it, the moment when a narrative cracked. And something more honest began to come through. He opened his notes, typed quickly, then paused. Not for facts, but for the question that now mattered more than anything: what does fairness really mean? Outside the courtroom, the story was already spreading again, clips, quotes, reactions, but this time, it wasn't just one voice, it was many, and they weren't all saying the same thing anymore. Back inside, Judge Carter adjusted his glasses slowly. His expression remained controlled, but his eyes had changed, not softened, but sharpened. More attentive, more aware. "The court acknowledges the testimony," he said. His voice was steady, but no longer dismissive. "This information will be taken into consideration." He tapped his pen lightly, a small sound, but it marked something important. Because the balance had shifted. Not decided, not concluded, but shifted. Maya remained seated. Her expression hadn't changed, but her shoulders lowered slightly, not in relief, but in recognition. The truth didn't need to be defended loudly. It just needed to be seen. And now, it was. The courtroom was quieter than it had ever been. Not because fewer people had come, there were more than before, every seat filled, every corner occupied, but because something had settled into the air. Not tension, not uncertainty, expectation. Outside, Chicago carried on as it always did. Cars moved, people rushed, the cold wind swept through the streets, but inside courtroom 3B, time felt slower, heavier, as if everyone understood they were about to witness something that would not easily be forgotten. Dr. Maya Bennett sat at the defense table, her posture steady, her expression composed. But there was something softer in her eyes now, not relief, not yet, but clarity. She had said what she needed to say. She had stood where she needed to stand. Across from her, Daniel Hayes sat still, unusually still. His usual restless energy had faded, replaced by a kind of quiet he didn't fully understand. His shoulders were slightly lowered, his hands no longer tapping, his gaze fixed somewhere ahead, but not on Maya. Beside him, Robert Hayes looked older than he had a few days ago. Not physically, but in the way his eyes carried weight. His back, once straight with certainty, now leaned slightly forward, as if he had been thinking more than he was used to. Judge William Carter entered. "All rise." The room followed. When he sat, something about him felt different. Not weaker, not uncertain, but less rigid, like a man who had spent the night reconsidering something he thought he already understood. "Be seated." A pause. Long enough for the silence to become noticeable. Then, "The court has reached a decision." Every sound disappeared. Every movement stopped. Even the air seemed to hold still. Judge Carter looked down at the documents in front of him, then slowly removed his glasses, setting them aside with deliberate care. "When this case began," he said, his voice measured, "it appeared to be a question of protocol, of whether established procedures were followed." He paused. "But as the court has heard testimony and reviewed the evidence, it has become clear that this case is not about procedure alone." His gaze lifted, rested briefly on Maya, then moved across the room. "It is about judgment." Another pause, and the responsibility that comes with it. Maya didn't move, but her eyes remained fixed on him. Judge Carter continued. Medical protocol exists to guide decisions, but it does not replace the necessity of professional assessment in moments of urgency. Victor Langford remained still, his expression controlled, but his silence now carried something different. Acceptance. Judge Carter placed his hands on the desk. "In this case," he said, "the court finds that Dr. Maya Bennett acted within the ethical obligations of her profession." A breath passed through the room. Quiet, but collective. She prioritized a patient in critical condition based on immediate medical need. He paused one last time. "Therefore, Dr. Bennett is found not guilty of negligence or misconduct." The words settled, not loudly, but deeply. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room shifted. A release. Subtle at first, someone exhaling, someone lowering their shoulders, but it spread. Maya remained seated, her hands still, her expression unchanged. But something inside her eased. Not victory, not triumph, just confirmation. Then something unexpected happened. Robert Hayes stood. The movement drew attention immediately, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't planned. He hesitated for a brief second, as if unsure whether he should. Then he stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said. His voice wasn't strong, but it was honest. Judge Carter looked at him. "This court has concluded." "I know," Robert said gently. "This isn't about the case." Another pause. Robert turned toward Maya. Up close, the uncertainty in his face was clear. The man who had once sat in the emergency room expecting immediate attention now looked like someone who had spent days reconsidering what mattered. "I was wrong," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. "I wasn't in danger that night," he continued, "not like she was." His eyes dropped briefly, then lifted again. "And I let that get lost." Daniel shifted beside him, his jaw tightening, but he didn't interrupt. Robert continued. "You did what you were supposed to do," he said to Maya. "You saved someone." A pause, then, "I'm sorry." The courtroom remained silent, not because people didn't react, but because they didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. Maya stood slowly. She didn't step forward, didn't move closer, but she met his gaze and nodded, not as acceptance of guilt, but as acknowledgement of truth. "That's all that matters," she said quietly. Judge Carter adjusted slightly in his seat. His expression remained composed, but something in his posture had changed, less rigid, more reflective. He cleared his throat lightly. "There is one more matter," he said. The room settled again. "When this case began, I approached it with a strict interpretation of procedural adherence." He paused, then, carefully, "In doing so, I may have overlooked the broader responsibility inherent in medical decision-making." Another silence. Short, but significant. This court acknowledges that bias, intentional or not, can influence perception. His gaze moved briefly toward Maya, then outward. "And for that, I will say this plainly. A rare moment, unscripted. I regret that." The words were not dramatic, but they were real. In the back of the room, Mark Reynolds lowered his phone slightly. The live feed numbers had climbed higher than anything he had covered in years, but for once, he wasn't focused on the numbers. He was watching the people, because this was the story. Not outrage, not conflict, but change. Beside him, Emily whispered, "That's not something you see every day." Mark nodded. "No," he said, "it isn't." He opened his notes, already knowing what the headline would become. Outside the courthouse, the story spread faster than before, but this time, it wasn't divided. It wasn't arguments, it wasn't noise, it was something clearer. A message. Days later, St. Mary's Medical Center looked the same on the outside. But inside, things had shifted. Policies were reviewed, discussions held, not about image, but about priority. About what it meant to treat a patient. And who decided what mattered first. Lena Carter stood in the same hallway where she had once hesitated. But now, her posture was different. Stronger, more certain. A small nameplate had been added outside a nearby office. Head nurse, Lena Carter. She touched it briefly as she passed, not out of pride, but as a reminder that doing the right thing had not broken her. It had built something. Across the city, a new segment aired. Mark Reynolds stood in front of the camera, his voice steady, his tone clear. "This is not just a story about one doctor," he said. "It's a story about what happens when humanity is tested and who we choose to be when it is." The title appeared beneath him. Doctors Who Choose Humanity. In a quiet hospital room, Alicia Brooks sat beside her grandmother once again. Eleanor was stronger now, still recovering, but present, alive. Alicia held a book in her lap. Medical terminology, highlighted, studied. Her eyes moved across the pages with focus, not fear, not uncertainty. Purpose. She glanced up briefly, toward the hallway, toward the place where everything had changed. Then back down again, because she already knew where she was going. And somewhere down that same hallway, Dr. Maya Bennett walked forward. Another shift, another patient, another decision waiting to be made. No cameras, no courtroom, just the same quiet truth she had always carried. When a life is slipping away, you don't ask who they are, you act. Sometimes doing the right thing is not written in rules or policies. It lives in the quiet choices we make when time is running out and someone needs us the most. In everyday life, we may not stand in an emergency room, but we face moments where we must choose between convenience and compassion, between judging quickly and understanding deeply, between protecting ourselves and standing up for what is right. This story reminds us that true character is revealed in seconds, in how we treat others and whether we see people as equal human beings or through labels like money status or background. Let this be a gentle reminder. Be kinder than necessary. Listen before you judge, and never ignore someone who might be silently struggling. We also need to reflect on ourselves. How often do we assume? How often do we react without knowing the full truth? Change begins when we choose to see clearly and act with integrity. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what you would have done in that moment. If you believe that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it is hard, type Amen in the comments. And if you want more stories that inspire real change in real lives, please support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. May God bless you and your family with wisdom, compassion, and strength every day.